Red Lines Part 2 by Chris McCarthy. 6 years earlier, they met randomly at a movie theater. They had both gone alone to a Thursday midday screening of Michael Keaton's comeback film and critical darling, Birdman. Celia was not at all fazed by going to the theater alone. She had the afternoon off and decided to go see the movie. No overthinking, no worrying about what it would be like seeing the movie alone. She did it all the time. For Leo, it was different. He agonized over the decision. What did going to the movie in the middle of the day mean about him? Did it mean he was lazy? Unproductive? Did it make him a loser? Could he afford it? He really should be tidying up the resume and getting himself out there, but also, he really deserved to relax. Once he decided that, yes, he would be seeing the movie today, or at least at this point it was a distinct possibility, he then wondered what it would feel like going alone. Would the cashier look at him strangely? Would he see anyone he knew, and what would they think of him? None of this was in his control, but he thought it was in some way, which years later he would realize was a problem and the reason for a lot of the things that went wrong in his life. Celia had sat 3 seats down from Leo, and in the middle of a preview for Billy Elliot the musical, she leaned over and said with a half smile and a glint in her brown eyes, "I don't think I'll be seeing that one. I don't do musicals in theaters. Maybe live, but not in theaters." Leo laughed politely and said, "Same. Not my cup of tea." They both leaned back in their seats, as Leo repeated the phrase, "not my cup of tea," in his head a few more times, reliving each time how stupid it had felt coming out of his mouth. Then Celia leaned forward and to the right, around the armrest, and asked Leo if he wanted half of her popcorn. She'd purchased the largest size and had had the wherewithal to get a brown cardboard tray from the concessions person, as if she'd been planning from the start to share it with someone. Leo noticed the effortless way she did things for people. Generosity was a part of who she was, but he also immediately knew that she never told herself she was generous or basked in it. Leo remembered thinking at the time that everything he did seemed to be done in the hope of some result, as if he was acting for an audience that would either clap for him or yell at him in approbation. Every detail and outcome considered. Celia moved to the seat next to Leo to divvy up the popcorn, then sat back, threw a handful of popcorn in her mouth, and stayed there for the full movie. Walking out during the credits, Leo was amazed to hear his lips mouth the words, "Well, I owe you for the popcorn. How about dinner sometime?" He hadn't even thought the words, hadn't played with them in his mind a few times to get them right. They just came out. What was this amazing woman pulling out of him? The strength and confidence she gave him. Leo noticed her slim waist and the way her coat fit her shoulders perfectly as she turned toward him and held her hand out for his phone. 3 days later, Leo and Celia went to dinner at one of Leo's favorite restaurants, an Italian place called Dina's, where the pair took over an unstuffed red booth for almost 2.5 hours. Leo knew the waitstaff wasn't rushing them to turn the table because of her. She had something about her that made people blur the rules. She was either unaware of it or at least never traded on it, which, of course, is why she had that way about her in the first place. That night at dinner, the time disappeared, even as Leo clung to each slippery minute. The highlight of the night was Leo's hospital visit. When dessert came out, the waiter dropped one of the 2 forks on the floor and promised to bring another one right away. After 3 minutes of watching the dessert instead of eating it, Leo went to the kitchen to ask for a fork. He ran into a busboy who set his tub of dishes down and quickly ran behind the steel pickup window to pull a fork out of a plastic tray. 3 bites into the dessert, Leo started to feel a tightness in his chest, then a tingling in his tongue and lips. His breathing became labored as red started to cloud the edges of his vision and the wooziness set in. Celia called 911 instantly. Instead of the warm August evening stroll with a possible stop at his Venice Boulevard apartment that Leo hoped for, his roommate Todd had been given instructions to shut the fuck up and stay in his room playing Call of Duty if he heard Leo come home with a companion. The date ended with Leo being rolled out on a gurney at high speed by 2 EMTs. He was administered epinephrine immediately, and his anaphylactic shock almost immediately subsided. His breathing went back to normal, and he felt the swelling around his eyes and mouth start to release. Still, his symptoms were so bad that the EMTs insisted on taking him to the ER for further observation. Turns out the busboy had handled a plate with oysters moments before getting the fork for Leo, and some shellfish oil was on his black rubber gloves. The ER doctor said it was not unusual for shellfish allergies to suddenly appear in adults in their 30s. From that night on, Celia kept an EpiPen in her purse just in case. And from that night on, Leo was in love. Celia hadn't balked once in the way she looked at him in his utter emasculation, hadn't betrayed a moment of embarrassment or desire to be anywhere but there. Him lying on the floor, barely breathing, in front of their booth, in his former favorite Italian restaurant, half a tiramisu spread on his chin and black button-up shirt. Loyalty was a big thing with Leo. Present day. Leo looked out the window, processing the reality of the situation. The cop caught Leo's state in the rearview mirror. He'd been talking for a few minutes, but Leo only caught a few words and phrases. He couldn't hear anything or wasn't ready to. What you did is help that woman and all the other people that man would have hurt should he have continued breathing, the cop continued. Leo took this in and heard the voice in his head say, "This is all real." He felt like crying but couldn't. Then he sat up, a sudden burst of energy surging through his body. "So, listen, you can just drop me off here or anywhere. I'll Uber home. I promise I will never say a word about any of this. I mean, if I said something, I'd be the one in trouble, right? We can just both disappear from each other's lives. Can't we?" Leo said. The cop exhaled audibly. "I can't do that," he said, nodding his head tightly left to right. "We need to make sure you're 100% clear of the incident. An associate of mine has already cleared the scene for any video footage, including Tesla or Ring cameras. He's even checking the local neighborhood north of the shopping center for any looky-loos. It's for your benefit. Once we decide you're clear and have planted a plausible story with our middleman, who will convey it to LAPD, who will be very receptive, by the way, no one's going to miss that man. Death by brick is an occupational hazard for his kind. Then, and only then, can we talk about your options." Leo's head spun. "Options? When you said we were going to get the rest of them, what did you—" Leo asked before getting cut off. "I have nowhere to stash you where you'll be safe, so I need to keep you close. And we need to get to the next place as soon as possible." The cop said nothing more as he sped the car up and changed lanes. Once off the freeway, they drove for another 20 minutes, winding through suburban neighborhoods and small commercial spaces in the city of Santa Ana. The house sat at the end of Lion Street. Between the house and the backside of what looked like a power substation beyond it sat an empty dirt lot strewn about with old clothes, a dilapidated Volkswagen Bug with a missing hood and engine, and countless trash bags. On one side of the street was a small Cuban restaurant that looked to be shuttered for good, a liquor store with boarded-up windows and a padlocked door, and a low-slung, flat-roofed, two-story industrial building with a parking lot on the street side. The whole property was enclosed by a tall chain-link fence with barbed wire at the top. This was a no-man's land if ever there was one. The cop pulled to an open spot at the curb, just outside the spray of light from the lone street light on the dark street. It seemed brazen to park just across the street, Leo thought. "We're waiting on one other guy," the cop said, emptying the final 2 pills from a prescription bottle into his mouth and chewing them without drinking water like they do in movies. He checked his watch and looked at the passenger side mirror. Seconds later, the passenger side door popped open and a short man with a paunch slid into the seat. The cop looked over and then turned his chin toward the back seat. "This is him?" the guy with the paunch said, before turning his body to get a better glance at Leo in the back seat. The cop ignored the comment and turned toward Leo. "You just sit in the car and wait," the cop said. "Okay, how long are you going to be gone? Am I safe here?" Leo asked. "I wish I had more time to explain, but it doesn't concern you. We'll be back and we'll get you out of here. Remember we talked about your options? We'll figure out those options. Okay? Cam, you ready?" the cop asked, pulling his gun out from under the seat. The man with the paunch, Cam, nodded and checked something in his waistband that Leo imagined was a gun too. "Wait, I don't even know your name," Leo said. The cop looked in the rearview mirror at Leo and said, "Just don't get out of the car." While Leo contemplated those words, the cop opened the door and slipped around to the front of the car in what seemed like one fluid motion. Seconds later, the cop was creeping along the left side of the house, having deftly stayed out of any splashes of light coming from the house. Cam had just as deftly moved to the right side of the house, peeking into a window. Leo hadn't even heard the second man exit the vehicle. Then suddenly both men were gone, having slipped into the shadows. Leo stared at the house, fully alert, desperate for a noise, anything that would help him understand more about his situation and his safety. Behind the bars on the windows, Leo saw thin lace curtains. Whoever was inside hadn't been there long enough to think about covering the windows better. They were on the move, not here for long, he understood. Seconds later, Leo saw the gunshots light up the windows. Bang, bang! 2 shots, 2 light flashes. He froze, white-knuckling the door armrest with one hand. Any inkling that this was part of the plan died when something happened on the right side of the home. Leo hadn't noticed a door there, but his mind quickly established that there was an entrance from the side yard into the house, possibly into the kitchen, and it must be where Cam had entered the house. Now the light from inside spilled out through the open door, and Leo saw Cam hurtling out the door and landing against several plastic trash cans, sending them flying like bowling pins. One opened up, spewing trash onto the dirt along the side of the house. Leo looked around the quiet street. It was still. No one was around. An alarm in Leo's head sounded. Get out of here. It's time. Get back to your life. But it was that last part that gave him pause. Did he have a life anymore? You don't just get away with killing someone, even someone bad, do you? He pulled on the door handle. It pulled easily, but there was no tension. It didn't engage. Leo couldn't get out of the car. Looking out the window as he pulled on the door handle, Leo watched Cam pull himself against the side of the house. Then Cam stuck his head above one of the fallen trash cans and looked directly at the car, nodding violently, trying to communicate something. What was he trying to say? By now, Leo had slid over to the other door, the one that faced the fenced-in industrial lot to the left of the car. This door was locked too. Leo remembered something about the back doors of police cars only being openable from outside the car. Cam was nodding even more violently now and stuck an arm past his head and gestured toward the house. Then Leo saw his body move violently, unnaturally in its prone position. He was being dragged back into the house. Bang, bang! The windows in the house lit up twice again. Leo froze. His heart pounded in his ears. Without thinking, he squeezed himself through the 18-inch wide opening in the plastic divide between the front and back seats and landed uncomfortably with his head in the footwell of the passenger seat, his back hitting hard against the front console and the empty shotgun holder. In the footwell under the passenger seat, lodged into a plastic holster, he saw a pistol. He'd never been this close to a gun. He righted himself and slid over to the driver's seat. From there, he reached back over and slid the gun out. He opened the driver's side door and stepped out. Halfway through closing the door, he looked across the car and watched a man step out of the front door of the house, look left and right, then duck back inside, leaving the door open. I should run. Just get out of here. Run 20 blocks over and Uber home, he thought. But he had no idea if any authorities were looking for him. He had never felt more unmoored. For now, he needed to trust this man who he thought was a cop. Come to think of it, he hadn't asked him if he was a cop. He'd just been assuming it the whole time because he was driving in an unmarked police vehicle with the radio and equipment you'd expect to see in such a vehicle. And he was the first one on the scene at the coffee shop. Leo quietly pushed the door closed and made himself small on the far side of the car. The speed of his breathing intensified as he looked down at the gun and slid the safety off. A kid could use one of these, he thought. Leo peeked an eye up above the car and saw that the man had again walked back out the door and was now a few steps into the yard, looking in the general direction of the car. He couldn't tell if the man saw the car, tucked away as it was in the darkness. Then the man walked quickly over to the side yard before again surveying the dark street. Not knowing if the man was going to walk toward him, Leo quickly jogged away from the car, staying low behind the other cars parked along the curb of the street. He could have turned and run the opposite direction of the house, but he didn't think he could climb the chain-link fence enclosing the old industrial center with the man on the lawn looking this way. The noise would certainly make his presence known. Besides, what would he do about the barbed wire at the top? Leo followed the pathway of the cul-de-sac toward the back of the power substation, then quietly slipped into the trash-strewn lot abutting the house, hoping he could find an exit somewhere in the back of it. Stopping a few feet into the lot, he tucked the gun into the back of his waistband. Now it was decided. He was definitely going to make a run for it. Leo ran deeper into the abandoned lot, dodging trash bags and old car parts, then tripped over an old tree stump, landing hard on his left knee and right shin. The pain shot through the midpoint of his shin where he had made contact and reverberated outward. He instinctively slid to his backside and reached both hands around the shin to assess the damage. Other than a cascade of blood and sharp pain, it wasn't that bad. He steeled himself to get back up and keep running, then turned his head and looked right through the open space in the overgrown ivy on the chain-link fence separating the lot and the house next to it. There, less than 10 feet away from him, sitting against the side of the house was the cop, the top of his black shirt soaked in red blood. At first, Leo thought he'd been shot. Then he saw the blood on the cop's chin and remembered the coughing fits. The cop tried to use the side of the house to prop himself up and stand up, but slid down again. Leo realized he was even sicker than he thought. Then Leo heard a tapping noise. His eyes darted around, then landed on a small window a few feet above and to the left of the cop. He saw a small hand pulling a black sheet back from the window. Then he made out the top of a head and then an eye. It was a small person, like a young girl. There was a look of fear in the eye as the person quickly pushed the black sheet back down to cover the window. It was then that Leo noticed the cop was looking directly at him. He held Leo's gaze for 2 long seconds, then stood up again and hobbled around the front of the house and entered the front door. Leo froze for a moment, then made another decision. He quickly ran back the way he had come toward the opening of the lot, and, hugging the last steel fence post and crouching down, swung onto the small lawn of the house and ran toward the house where the cop was sitting moments earlier. Leo froze for a moment, then made a new decision. He quickly ran back the way he came toward the opening of the lot, and, hugging the last steel fence post and crouching down, he swung onto the small lawn of the house and ran toward the side where the cop was sitting moments earlier. He heard something faint inside of the house, 2 men yelling maybe. Then it was quiet. Now crouching against the front of the house, Leo took a small step toward the front door. He noted that it was a few inches open. He pushed the door open slowly. Once inside the house, Leo padded across the small linoleum entryway before he stepped onto the too thick carpet. It was dark inside. He turned left and saw a cheap wooden door with a padlock on it on the far side of the living room. He quickly connected that door with the blacked-out window and the fearful eye. Leo's attention was pulled down the hall to the right when he sensed a body cross into a room on the far side of the hall, which he knew was the kitchen, the way you always seem to know where the kitchen in a house is. He tucked himself up against a small alcove by the entryway. He forced himself to check his breathing, then peeked around the wall. All clear now, he stepped out into the hallway and took a few cautious steps down the hall. The gun was in his hand. When Leo got to the dark kitchen, he tripped over something and lost his footing, trying to regain it as he took another 2 steps and slammed into the countertop on the opposite side of the kitchen, knocking pans off the stovetop. He righted himself with his hands on the counter as his eyes started to adapt to the dark room. One of the pans was still warm to the touch. He froze and listened. He had made way too much noise for nothing to happen. Then he looked down and behind him and realized what he had tripped over. It was the cop laid out face down, limp and heavy like a sack of rice near the entrance to the kitchen. On the far side of the kitchen, by a door that indeed went outside into the side yard, he saw Cam's body, his chest and neck bullet-ridden. He was dead. It was then that the man he'd seen in the yard earlier walked out from the shadows of the opposite corner of the kitchen, just in front of what looked to be a pantry door. It took Leo a moment to see the shotgun pointed at him. The man walked toward Leo speaking Russian. Leo didn't need an interpreter to know that the man was spewing hateful violence, albeit calmly. Leo pointed his gun at the man. Then suddenly his hands felt thick around the joints and his arms felt heavy. Leo looked at his arm and was surprised to see he was barely holding the gun above his waist, its barrel facing a spot on the floor well away from the Russian. He tried to pull it up and point it at the Russian, but his arms wouldn't do what he wanted them to. Then Leo fell back against the counter and slid down to the floor. He dropped the gun and clutched his chest, grasping for breath. What is happening? Had he been stabbed or shot? Did it happen so fast that he didn't hear the gun discharge? Leo searched his chest the best he could with his hands and didn't feel any injuries or any blood. The man with the shotgun wore a look of surprise that slowly turned into a smile as he leaned down to scoop up Leo's gun. He grunted something in Russian and set Leo's gun down on the small kitchen table and cocked his own shotgun. Leo's eyes started to cloud up. He saw 2 hazy outlines of the man as he approached him. He held his hands up in a weak form of defense. The man slapped them down, and Leo couldn't lift them back up even though he was desperate to. His heart beat in his head louder now. From the corner of his eye, he saw one of the pans he knocked off the counter earlier. 6 shrimp tails dotted the floor around it. Fuck. He hadn't carried an EpiPen with him for 6 years. It had always been in the bottom of Celia's purse. He thought back to their first date, as the following 6 years with her played back in his head in 3 seconds, just before everything went dark. End of part 2.